You're going to get a first-hand crash course in creative finance. Are you interested? Because not every agent is actually okay with it. I don't know if his brokerage would be willing to do it, right? There's all these things.
Welcome to the Top Tier Podcast, where we take you to new heights in the world of real estate, capital raising, and business entrepreneurship. Meet your hosts, Daniela and Landon, industry experts passionate about success. Join them on the Top Tier Podcast as they share real-world experiences, practical solutions, and strategies to overcome business and real estate challenges. From expert interviews to actionable advice, they aim to inspire and empower you. Subscribe now to never miss an episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Top Tier Podcast. Today we have Chris Geddes with us, who actually successfully sold his home SubTo for a pretty big gain. So this is a really interesting story because I was a transaction coordinator on this, and I've worked with Chris in other capacities, as does Landon. And so, Chris, talk to me a little bit about why you would even consider doing this.
Hi, everybody. My name's Chris Geddes. We have in our wholesale business, we do creative finance. We do sub-twos. And it felt a little bit hypocritical to not want to offer this as a seller, since we ask so many buyers to do this on a day-to-day basis. And really the root of it is I knew in the timing of the market and what was going on that offering creative finance, offering SubTo would really be able to maximize the outcomes for me and my family. So that was the root of it. We worked with our agent. We worked with everyone around us, knowing that if you wanted to do it a creative option, there were the ability to do that, and the results kind of set up for themselves. We sold the house for much more than we would have been able to sell it conventionally in that market. The buyer had a lot of benefits of getting a low interest rate, and we walked away with the amount of money we wanted to walk away with. So it was really successful for everybody. And I think that's the root of a lot of these. Oh, go ahead.
What's great about this too is that, those of you who are watching this video, maybe you're a seller considering selling your home, or your property is on market and it isn't selling and you're considering these types of options. This is going to be the episode for you, because this is going to give you the perspective from someone who sold their home SubTo. And not only just that, someone who can sell their home SubTo on market, which is totally possible, and doing it with a savvy real estate agent that understands the intricacies, the nuances, and all those protections. And so what'll be really cool in this episode with you, Chris, is to get your perspective on a lot of the questions that a lot of people who are selling their home creatively have, especially with properties that are on market. How does it work with an agent? What about insurance? What about if they miss a payment? All of those aspects, it'll be cool to get your perspective on this episode, because many sellers out there have so many questions. And unfortunately, there's a lot of buyers like myself out there that unfortunately are bad operators and don't know how to do these properly. And so hopefully this episode can iron out all of those things for sellers and buyers, so we can operate professionally, legally, and do this the right way. And so that's what's going to be great about this episode.
Yeah, I'm excited. We should be able to go through all those questions, and really anyone who's considering selling their property in SubTo, hopefully you could use this as a kind of a case study of how to do it successfully.
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Okay.
So I guess, when we start this, how your home is in Bozeman, Montana. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you can do this. You can do this in all 50 states, correct? You can sell a home and buy a home SubTo in all 50 states. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, I think our business, we've done at least 15 states so far in the last 12 months, if not more. So yeah.
And I have transacted in close to 35 states. It looks a little different in every state, depending on regulations and things, but essentially it's the same concept. You are taking over somebody's mortgage subject to the existing terms and balance. Right,
exactly. And so, and with yours, Chris, in price point necessarily doesn't matter. And what I mean by that is if you're selling your home for $200,000, like we've done, we've purchased those, or if you're selling your home for north of $1 million, which is what you just sold your home. You just sold a home and letting someone else take over the payments of a home that was over $1 million. And so it's likely your largest asset that you hold in your portfolio, if not, maybe I'm wrong, but, and so I guess what motivated you? What was something that kind of triggered you to kind of go down that path and consider the SubTo as an option?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, yeah, I mean, our primary home was our, largest asset, easily, no questions asked. If people don't know, the Montana market over the last several years has gotten very hot. Prices have gone up a bunch. It's a very, in Bozeman in particular, is a very desirable place to be. But even with that, we listed our house on market in September of 2023. Uh, so spoiler alert, we closed in August of 24. So we were on market for almost a year. Um, and that highlights, if you think back in September 2023, it was probably one of the worst times in the last 20 years to put a house on market. Interest rates were the highest they'd ever been. I think at that time, the 30-year fix was like 7.5%.
Mhm.
That price point is like this weird thing of not being high enough where it's an all cash buyer, but being high enough where someone does need a mortgage where interest rates really, really impact them. I remember chatting with the agent at the time. He's like, if the house was worth like 1.7, 1.8, you'd probably have a cash buyer and be done with it. But that wasn't the case. And so knowing that and having kind of like thick skin that this could be a while, we let the house sit on market for 30 days. We didn't get a lot of interest like a lot of people at that time. And then we really started to explore what other options that would allow us to achieve our goals, and then help a buyer actually get into a house that made sense for them. And that's when we started discussing creative finance. My wife and I personally, of offering that to our agent and having that be an option for any buyers that would be interested.
How did
Interesting.
Amanda feel about that? Was she kind of like, I don't know, Chris?
I mean, I have to say my wife is pretty amazing. Every kind of crazy idea I've come up with in the last 18 months in regards to real estate and all of this, she just generally goes, "Oh, I trust you. This will be great. Go, honey, have fun."
Wow,
So that
huge.
which is testament to having a solid partner, a solid spouse. But yeah, she's been very aware of what we were doing in creative finance, and she understood that I understood the mechanics, and frankly, she can explain creative finance better than I can at this point, in certain times. So it was kind of a logical progression of, again, it felt hypocritical. We were asking sellers every day in our business to want to do this for us. Why, as sellers, could we not be willing to do the same thing?
That's so great. And what's critical there in that progression that you alluded to there was that you guys evaluated your goals, your ambition to sell your home. And I think what's clear and critical here is like you definitely wanted to sell your home. You didn't want to turn it into a rental property. You didn't want to do this. You didn't want to turn it into a short-term rental or whatever it may be. Your ambition was to sell your home. And time on market was hurting you, not only in a high interest rate market, but also just overall. Now people are asking the question of what's wrong with the home or whatever it may be. We see that with a lot of our purchases too of homes that are 150 plus days on market. It's like there's something that's causing this home to sit on here, right? And so that those conversations probably were about to come, and unfortunately, you have a decision to make. Do you rent the home? Do you move back into it? Do you do some massive price drops? Or an alternative that can achieve everything, which is what you ended up doing, and a lot of our sellers do, is they allow someone to take over the payments of the existing debt, the existing deed of trust on the home. And so you can leverage and sell it for north of $1 million, not for every property, but you can get the price that you want to sell your home and the home is worth. And so that's what's cool too of what you did. So maybe you can elaborate on the deal details of, let's break it down of, you sold it for X, you had a mortgage balance of this, which left over about this much equity. Let's go through kind of the deal breakdown so we can start to dive into it a little bit more.
Yeah. Actually, before I jump into that, I really want to highlight on that point of these concerns that sellers have of like when you're on market 60, 90, 120, 150 days, it weighs on the market. People start to assume that things are wrong. And I need to be clear, we had all of those emotions. We listed the property, it expired and then we relisted it
Oh,
again.
that's
So
hard.
yeah, I mean, we had that whole experience, and our situation, and I think this is the good motivation for a seller is really understand what your motivation is. For the first, like we were happy to wait 6 or 9 months because that property did essentially cover its expenses. We had an apartment above it that we could use for short-term rentals. It was a big selling point for the property, at least we thought at the time. So we had some flexibility, kind of wait it out for a conventional thing, and we run into this. with people we work with who are looking to sell, sometimes they don't actually have that motivation. It does take 6 months of it being on market to actually want to be open to the discussion. And I want to reiterate to people, like, that's very fair feeling to have, like willing to wait for a conventional offer. In hindsight, looking back now, I kind of wish we would have started marketing the creative aspect a little bit earlier, because I think we would have actually been able to solve the problem sooner. And that's the big thing for me of, if you are comfortable with willing to do this, you can actually get your problem solved much faster than waiting and hoping for a conventional offer or something like that. And so that was pretty cool for us because we had that whole experience. And once, I would say, we'd been on market maybe about 7 months, then we really started pushing the creative aspect of it. And then more interest started coming in, and we having more conversations. We actually felt like we could sell the house. So just wanted to clarify.
Is this
that.
something that, obviously you have a plethora of experience doing a lot of creative finance deals, be it seller finance, be it mirror wraps or sub-twos and other aspects and funky things, hybrids, which is what this ended up being. But was this something that you brought up to your agent, or did your agent kind of bring up that conversation?
Oh, I brought it up to my agent. We did a
Right.
full-on education,
Yep.
sat down with him, explained it. Daniela was involved, being like, hey, this is a transaction coordinator who helps with this and really guides this along. And I really pitched it to my agent of, you're going to get a first-hand crash course in creative finance. Are you interested? Because not every agent is actually okay with it. I don't know if his brokerage wouldn't be willing to do it, right? There's all these things. And he goes, no, I'm all in. And he was really open to it. And actually, I do believe he was a great advocate for me as a seller. Once he kind of got it, took a couple times. Once he got it and realized what was going on, he was amazed of how much it actually changed the dynamic of what we could do with this property. And we'll go into the numbers now, but he wholeheartedly agrees. I chatted with him 2 weeks ago. You got the highest price you possibly could for this property. And
Exactly.
the only way to be able to do that was using creative finance.
I think that's the biggest thing too, Chris, is that not just the nickels and dimes, I always say, of like achieving as much as you can, but many sellers in situations, and we have sellers probably watching this episode right now that don't know anything about creative finance or anything. And unfortunately, neither does the agent. And so they're in this world of they only have one shovel that can solve this problem that they're trying to force into a situation that a shovel isn't solving the problem. And so kudos to you, obviously having your education and awareness and comfortability to be able to bring this to your agent, educate him and train him and make him what we call a unicorn agent who now understands creative finance to add now something else to his tool belt. And so, we've built up amazing relationships, but if you're an agent out there, if you can learn and harness at least a general understanding and work with someone like Chris, who can educate you by doing and educate you by going through a process, like just think about the amount of not only the volume of deals, but also how much more you can get your clients' homes sold for. And so that's what's really cool too, is like sellers can educate through here, as well as agents too, of like how to properly structure and do this safely, legally, and all the things. And so I guess, Daniela, did you have anything here before we started to jump into the numbers?
Yeah. So you bring up something really important, and this is something that agents deal with. It's something sellers deal with. It's something buyers. This is a prevalent theme in creative finance. And that's, you have to really know why you want to sell. What is the motivation to sell? And what is the goal in selling? Are you in a situation where you are willing to take a lower price point? Are you in a situation where you financially cannot take a lower price point? Where are you at? Because that will ultimately determine if creative finance is the right solution for you. And if it is the right solution for you, it's a really exciting solution for agents because they're not getting cut out. I mean, Chris paid everyone on the team. He had a lawyer, there was a buyer's agent, there was a seller's agent, there was a transaction coordinator, there was an attorney team, there was title and escrow. I mean, we could not have been more shored up. We were probably overrepresented. You were probably overrepresented. You probably paid too many people. But the fact of the matter is, this was a really great situation to exhibit that you could have that full force team and walk into this feeling secure, knowing that every corner was taken care of. And the coolest part is the agent buyers and sellers made the back. They made a good commission on this sale, even though it was a creative sale. So
Yes, they did.
it's not a situation where you're cutting people out of their professional, like you didn't cut the experts out. What you did is you brought the experts in. And I think a lot of sellers, when they consider creative finance, they don't understand who the experts are. They don't understand that they can have an agent stay in the deal. They don't understand who else they can bring into the deal to make it more secure, to make them feel better. And that's just such a large gap in these purchases and in these sales. And it's not something that a lot of people are educating on. Wouldn't you say that that is not something that a lot of wholesale teams educate on when they are pairing together a seller and a buyer? That you can bring in an attorney, you can keep the agent on board, like you can do all these things. It
Yeah,
sucks.
it happens all the time, and I think one of the biggest obstacles we initially had to go through was like people are like, "How are we going to get paid?" It's like how you normally would get paid. Like we're expecting you to get paid in these deals, and we see this in so many of these creative finance tracks, and it's not even mine. You can kind of tell the agent's not willing to ask it, but once you say, "Oh yeah, yeah, you get paid, don't worry," and then just a lot of the guardrails drop down, and that's an education thing with the agents, and then also making sure the seller feels comfortable of how the people they've retained are going to get compensated as well. It's very common. I agree.
So
Yeah.
speaking of compensation, what did this deal look like? Let's jump into the numbers.
Yeah. So we had the property on market. I'll go from it. We went on market at the worst time ever at 1.2 and crickets. We had people showings, all the things. People came in, they said they liked it, but never had an offer for, gosh, 6 or 7 months.
Oh
Right?
my
Just the
God, that's a
nature of
long
it.
time. That's a long
Wow.
Yeah,
time.
right. Long time, no offer. And again, we were in a position where that was okay. The property essentially paid for itself while we were waiting, and we had the luxury to wait. Totally fine. So we did that. Then, again, towards, after 6 months, we're like, we'd really like to sell this house. Let's make this happen. So we dropped the price to 1.1. A little more interest, but again, nothing really, really conventionally at that point.
Mm.
And this is the part we really started shifting to doing more and more creative. And the things that were really beneficial for this house were um, we had a 3.75% interest rate on the
Nice.
mortgage, which is great. We bought this property in January of 21. So like
Oh,
interest rates couldn't have been much lower, right? When you think about that. And so that was really, really valuable for that property. And we felt very comfortable of helping a new buyer leverage. And the phrase we often used was, if you're willing to agree to our terms, it's like you're buying in 21 again.
mm.
And that kind of stuck with a lot of people like, oh, buying in 21 was a good time. Um, and so what we ended up doing is our final buyer, we did a 1.1 purchase price. We did a $400,000 down payment, which people go, whoa, that's a large down payment. I will say that there are buyers out there that are willing to put that amount of money down for a good deal. And so don't get in your head of the buyer, but they were happy to do 400K down. That allowed us to do a couple things. Cover all the commissions and the bills and all the closing costs that we have for the property as a seller we had to pay. We had roughly $100,000 HELOC on the property that we had taken out for investment purposes and to acquire properties. We wanted to pay that off. The buyer really wanted us to pay that off at closing, which makes a lot of sense. Um, and then we were looking for some money to receive from that. And then our underlying mortgage was roughly like $610,000, I think, Daniela. You know the numbers, but roughly
Yeah.
give or take there. And what the resulting thing ended up being is $400,000 down, subtoing or taking purchasing the property subject to the existing mortgage of about $610,000 at 3.75%,
Hmm.
which left about $90,000 of equity that was not going to be paid off at close. And this was what we call a hybrid deal, where you have a first position mortgage, and then we put a second position note in our name at 4% interest that the seller pays us monthly on a 30-year note. So the end result for this property is we netted about $250,000, and we get about $450 a month in cash flow from this property for the next 30 years.
Do you have a balloon on that remaining portion of equity that is to be paid off, or is it you don't care?
We do not have a balloon. We don't care. I thought that was a pretty reasonable kind of negotiation with the buyer. And I want to stress to a lot of people, and I think I want a lot of sellers to think about this. We often chat with people like, I want a 3-year balloon. I want a 5-year balloon. I understand that people want their money faster, but I really believe that a lot of that need for that balloon is based on trust, not actually needing that money for something. And so trust your buyer. You will not feel like get a way to have that buyer help you build that trust. So you don't feel like that. Because if you look at the statistics, the average person in the US only stays in a home, what is it, 5, 7 years, maybe 8? What is
Yeah,
it
at
peaking at
most.
now? Life changes. Rarely are these homes forever homes. And if anything, a lot of, especially if an investor is buying it, an investor has incentive to sell it to move on to the next property or to take their equity out when they've made the improvements and then refinance you out. So the long of that is I didn't feel like a balloon was necessary because just with the nature of life, I fully expect to have that money back probably in 5 to 7 years. And if it goes longer, fantastic. I'm making the interest payments on it. I'm getting that monthly payment that works. But the desire to have it back quickly just really wasn't important to me.
So just to clarify here, when you say you're going to get the money back and you're potentially getting the money back in 5 to 7 years, the way you're going to get that back is by the person you sold the home to either refinances and gets a whole brand spanking new loan for the home
Market rate
at
interest.
market rate, and interest
Yeah.
rate right now would be dumb to do, which is why they bought the home the way they did. So they wouldn't refinance right
Yep.
now. But let's say interest rates drop back down to a reasonable, level, they could refinance. And in that case, the remaining 90K or whatever's left over of Chris's equity would be paid off. Or
Yep.
if the buyers of this home decide in 5 to 7 years to sell the home, that new buyer that comes in is going to pay off all underlying debts. So that original first position deed of trust, that first mortgage, and the remaining equity that Chris is owed will be paid out at that close of escrow. And so in both instances, the remaining portion of equity is paid off. And so that's what he means is that he's going to receive that money here, probably in 5 to 7 years or whenever it happens. It could last for 30 years, but the likelihood of that is, how many people hold their homes, especially nowadays at our age, for 30 years? It's probably 1%.
Another really unique thing about this deal, though, is that, and another layer of protection for Chris and Amanda was the fact that this was not a true subject to mirror wrap purchase, where when the sale closed, the deed conveys completely to the buyer. This was sold on a contract. So technically it was a contract hybrid sale, which is the first contract hybrid sale I've ever been a part of. They are more unique, but the really cool thing, contract sales are called different things in different states. In some states they're called agreement for sale. In some states they're called executory contracts. And in some states they're called contracts for deed. Chris did a contract for deed in Montana, which means he holds equitable title. He is on the deed with this buyer until the buyer fulfills the mortgage, until the buyer fulfills the debt. This is another layer of protection for Chris and Amanda. This allows them to stay in the deal. It allows them control. It allows them to, if this person is not performing, it's easier for them to get their asset back. So this is something for sellers that is much more beneficial. And it's, when you're sitting there going in your mind, why would somebody do this? And you start to look at all the benefits that Chris and Amanda were able to procure. And on top of it, it was a contract sale. And they stayed in the deal. It's huge. It completely changes the game. It's not just this thing where you're going, I hope this person's going to pay my mortgage. Here's the deed to the house. You know what I mean? It's just it's a totally different deal. And it provides a level of mindset security that most people are looking for when they're sitting there just going, I just can't get my mind around doing that.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I was comfortable doing it as a traditional SubTo with a mirror wrap. The buyer actually requested this, which is generally uncommon with investors. And I think there's some misconceptions of when people are buying a creative finance, they want to take title because they want to be able to take depreciation, all the tax benefits, and all those things. Which, yes, if you do that, you 100% can. But with the right CPA and understanding, we feel very comfortable you can take those same benefits when you purchase on a contract for deed.
You
And
can.
it's like, I think a misnomer. A lot of people are like, oh, I can't do that. Well, no, you very much can. And so the reason why we ended up structuring the transaction as a contract for deed was my buyer was actually very concerned about the due on sale risk,
Mm,
which I often had to say, I'm the one taking the big risk here. The mortgage is still in my name. You're taking the house. I said that multiple times, and she goes, "Well, I think it's just, And then so I remember I offered, well, if we did a contract for deed, title won't change. There's nothing to do on sale, and you still get the house and all the benefits. She goes, that'd be great. And so it was really interesting that I've actually never seen a buyer request that protection when the seller can take more of that risk, but it ended up working out perfectly for us.
Yeah, because it's interesting. So you've talked about all the pros, and let's talk about a little bit of really the main typical concerns a seller and their representative agent may have in these types of transactions. And you just hit on one right there, which is the big one that people talk about, which is what's called the due on sale clause. So maybe elaborate a little bit further on that, Chris, as it relates to that conversation you kind of slightly did right there, as it relates to selling your home and why you feel safe and why you feel protected.
Yeah. So, the big risk is that I would argue 99% of residential mortgages in the US have a phrase in the contract that says due on sale. So, in the event that the underlying balance is due, if the property, or the lender has the right to call the underlying mortgage due if the property is sold. He has the right. They don't have to. They just can choose to. Very clear in that in those contracting. That's what can happen. And so a lot of sellers are worried, or not really. A lot of agents are aware of this phrasing, and then they talk about this with their sellers. Because what could technically happen is say, hey, you've sold this house, you owe $600,000 on it. I need my $600,000, and they accelerate the amount that amount due. Obviously, for a lot of people, it's like, well, I don't have $600,000 sitting in my bank account to pay this off. What happens? And you have a buyer that's involved, someone else who owns the property, and the debt's here, the property's here. What do you do in this scenario? And this is why these SubTo contracts very much highlight the relationship between the buyer and seller, and you may have to work these things out after the fact. The one thing I will say, and Daniela, you probably see more of this, you can chime in, but due on sale is like the number one boogeyman. But I believe in the groups I frequent, and I think they did $500 million in creative finance transactions in 2024 or 2023. I think I heard of 10 instances of due on sale. 10 instances, not $10 million of it, 10 instances total of due on sale. And I do not know of anyone who's actually lost the property, either the seller
No,
or the buyer.
no, that typically does not. It typically does not go that far.
Yeah, exactly.
There's ways to remedy, and there are. It's different in different states, right? But there's absolute ways to remedy due on sale. One of my clients went through a due on sale, and the bank just said, deed it back. Deed it back, please, to the seller. Please deed it back to the seller, or we're going to have to accelerate it. And, he had the option as an investor to deed the property back to the seller, or refinance out the seller and take the property, continue to hold the property in his LLC's name. Or, this is an option too. A lot of people believe that purchasing in trusts is the preferable way to go, that it provides some layer of anonymity when it comes to due on sales. And trusts are absolutely more beneficial in some states, primarily two. And the rest of the states, they don't have the same function. Where they do have a very interesting function is in dealing with a due on sale that's been called, because you could deed the property back to the seller, create a trust, and with the seller, create a trust with the seller. So you're not changing the name of where the deed sits or anything like that. And then put the property in the trust, and you and the seller are in the trust, and you kind of go on your merry way and utilize this investment the way you had intended. So there's so many intricacies to this, but I think that's the big part of this conversation. there are so many ways to navigate this due on sale. And it happens so infrequently, right? So infrequently that it's sort of not really something that needs to take center stage, but it does, because people don't understand what it means. People don't understand how to get out of it. People don't understand that it doesn't have to be, it doesn't eclipse you in the home. It doesn't eclipse this opportunity for you. They just don't know what they don't know. And I mean, right, we're sitting here going, we know from experience. We know from, I mean, I've transacted close to 100 files this year, and I've had one due on sale come up. And that was from a client that, you know, it was just, these things just happen, and there's no way to prove where it comes from. That's another thing people really get caught up on. Well, it's the insurance. Well, it's the e-transfer. Well, it's the this. There is no categorical way to prove how, when, why, or where a due on sale comes from. It is completely just, it can be really unpredictable. And so that's why you work with a transaction coordinator or manager that really helps you try to navigate through this transaction professionally, so that you are lowering your risk, like you're mitigating your risk, right? People go, why do you hire a TC? You hire a TC to mitigate risk, just so you're trying to avoid holes in the lifeboat. But sometimes things just happen. So being prepared to deal with the boogeyman is great. Letting the boogeyman dictate what you're going to do and not do is the same thing as going, I cannot move to California because I'm afraid I might die in an earthquake. You know, when last time a fatal earthquake, knock on wood, I'm going to shut up now, right? Because now we're going to have but it's the same thing where I'm going, oh my God, I could never move to Iowa because the movie Twister made me shit my pants. Like, it's like the same stuff. Like, it's the same freaking thing. I'm going to die. And it's these folks that get, and like, there's a breed of human like this. They become paralyzed by fear because of chance and circumstance. But the thing is like, this is the realm the three of us have decided to live in. Instead of being fearful of chance and circumstance, we've decided to just pull out a whip and go, you're the whipping boy, chance and circumstance, and I'm holding the whip. And I'm just going to do this because I understand that this is a very small part of this entire experience, you know? And so like explaining that to other people and agents, and it's hard. It's hard breaking through that mindset. And frankly, like there's a group of folks that you just can't do it with. Totally. And that's okay, because there's several billion people on the planet, and there's plenty of people you can't.
Yeah. I mean, there's that aspect too. And one thing I always try to illuminate here too is that, you know, Wells Fargo and many of these big U.S. Bank of America, and any lender that has a deed of trust against a home are in the business to do what? Lend money and make money on their money, right? That's what they're doing. They're not investing in real estate. Real estate is the vehicle for them to lend money as an asset leverage so that it has value that they can make a 3.75 to 5 to 7% interest rate on their money, amortized, right? And so lenders are not in the business of owning real estate. They're in the business of lending on their money. So they don't own homes. They don't want to own the homes. They're de-incentivized to call the note due. So that is exactly what you were saying, Daniela, of like mitigating the risk to not have that called, but you're also somewhat being protected from the mortgage company. They send you a note, a letter that says, hey, we noticed this, blah, blah, blah. You hear your options to remedy the situation and not have the loan accelerated. And so they give you the outs that you need. And so in you touched on it earlier of all of these different due on sales that were called, all 10 of them of 10,000 plus transactions or whatever it was, or 100,000 transactions, is that in every instance, the home was not lost. It was done through a trust or deeded back to the sellers and purchased on a contract for deed or various aspects. So there are solutions to the problem, to the fear. And so anyways, and I heard a stat too, and maybe you can correct me, Daniela, but you know, in the case of a foreclosure, like if you're going through a foreclosure process, you know, the lender forecloses on you and takes over the home. It costs on average $50,000 to $75,000 for that lender to go through the entire foreclosure process. the lender is so de-incentivized to go through that process
Oh
and
yeah.
similar to calling the note due that they can't, anyways. So that being said, like the due on sale clause is a figure outable problem.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're working with the right team, like a Daniela, like me, like Chris, you're going to be able to trust and know that they have your best fiduciary interests in mind that are going to protect you. And there's other great operators out there that do it the right way too and ensure that you're protected. And that's why I always say too, these transactions matter on trusts more than the nickels and dimes, but nonetheless. And so I guess also, Chris, another big objection that I get from sellers and agents too is like, well, what if you miss a payment? So maybe you can touch on that too. It's because now, really you have your your buyer has two payments. They have the mortgage payment that they're making to, we'll just call it Wells Fargo, your bank that you got the original mortgage from that's in your name, as well as that $425 that comes to your bank account every single month. So I guess what if they miss a payment to you?
Yeah, I mean, it is a real concern that you could have. You, if they, if the seller is or the buyer is more than 30 days late on a payment, it can impact your credit. These are all things that sellers should be aware of when they go into these transactions. And this is where, as a seller, you just need to ensure that you have these protections and understand if everything goes wrong, what are the ways you can remedy this to fix it? And in our contract, the buyer and I are very aware of what the terms of default look like. We have, a certain number of days that a missed payment is. And then at that point, since we're doing a contract for deed, we have the ability to take the property back. But even if you do a standard SubTo with a mirror wrap, there are terms where essentially with a mirror wrap, you as the seller are the one where the money is being obligated towards. So you have the ability to foreclose, take the property back, and have control in that sense. Now, is that an ideal scenario? Of course not. But it comes down to, in any transaction or decision in life, you have pros and cons. And so for this situation, I feel confident that the seller is going to make payments based on the credibility she's provided to me, the conversations we have, that I know that the property has the ability to make money off it. I mean, I think for a lot of sellers, they should ask the question to like an investor buyer, how are you going to make money off this? Are you doing a long-term rental? Are you doing a short-term rental? What's your background in this?
Yes.
Because when I
Vet
come in
your
and say,
buyer.
hey, vet your buyer, right? You should vet your buyer. And this is key for anyone. And you wholesalers out there not vetting your buyers, this is talking to you, vet your buyers, right? No one wants to have that conversation of, hey, they missed their payment. What's going on? The wholesaler gets that question if you don't vet your buyers. But understanding what they're going to do with it. And if it sounds crazy, like, oh, I'm creating a zoo for wild animals at your house and I'm going to charge people $100 a day to come see it. Maybe they're not going to pay your bill, right? But if they're like, hey, yeah, we partner with a sober living operator and we've already got a lease signed, they're ready to go in the house. This is how much we're going to be making. This is how much your mortgage is. We're going to be able to pay you. We got a 2-year lease or whatever it is. Like, I feel much more comfortable as a seller being able to do that. And every seller should ask that conversation. If your buyer doesn't have a good answer of like what they're going to do with your house, then you maybe shouldn't consider selling to them. But with my buyer, we were able to do that, and so I feel confident that they will make those payments. And then a lot of sellers I know hate when I say this to them, but there's a huge benefit if I get this house back, like a huge benefit. Like if everything goes to hell and I get the house back, I get this asset that I know has a certain value. I know that the amount owed on it is enough that I could go out and resell it, even at a fire sale if I had to. Or, I know where it is. Like, I own this asset for a long time. I know the intrinsic value that it had. And so if they default and I get it back, well, then I've taken everything my buyer's already given me, down payment, the monthly payments, the interest, the pay down on the principal they've had in the time frame. Like, if she defaults in 5 years, well, she paid down my mortgage for 5 years. She's done all these things.
With that. You're kind of okay with that.
Yeah, I'm kind of okay with it. And so that is why, yes, you should understand what you do in the worst case scenario. But again, it's I would argue most people aren't trying as most operators, if they're good operators, have very little incentive to not pay your mortgage. Like,
yeah, 100%. Dude. Like the amount that their mortgage is every month. I just think I have this conversation often of of many of the properties that we purchase, where, we're likely into the deal upfront at close of escrow for, 50, 75,000, sometimes $100,000 all in, and they have a $2,000 mortgage. And so, you zoom out to 3 years, it would be irresponsible for me as a buyer to miss a $2,000 payment after I've put in $100,000 at close, plus making that payment every single month. I've paid the loan down so much, and the home is appreciated at 3 to 5% compounding every single year. And so we're developing leverage. So for me to miss a single mortgage payment would be catastrophic to my, not only business, but the whole situation. And so, can it happen? Certainly. But then also too, in many of these transactions, what Daniela, maybe you can touch on this too, is that we in escrow draft up, for protection's sake, for the seller in these transactions, what's called an all-inclusive deed of trust and promissory note. Now, a promissory note is just paper. It is a binding piece of paper, certainly, and an attorney drafts it and it looks cool. It has great font, but it is just paper. But the all-inclusive
not just paper, Landon. Okay, it has a purpose.
I don't know. but then there's also the all-inclusive deed of trust, which really, that is to me, the bigger security instrument, which protects a seller in this type of transaction, that allows them the opportunity to take the property back over through the true formal legal process.
So yeah, a little bit more on this. They're package deal, right? Deed of trust comes with promissory note. Promissory note comes with deed of trust. One or the other alone, does not pack a powerful punch.
Maybe that's what I was meaning.
Yeah, and the promissory note, its purpose is that it creates a lien on the property. So basically, when you when you put a promissory note as a promise to pay a debt. A promise to pay a debt on a home is a lien, putting a lien on it. So what you're doing is your buyer is creating another lien on the property because they have a promise to pay the seller off and complete the mortgage obligation that the seller originally signed up to incur, right? So when a buyer defaults, they have legal remedy through the instructions in the promissory note to go ahead and start the foreclosure procedure so that they could take the deed of trust. They could take that deed back into their name, right? And do away with whatever the buyer is. If they ghosted, if they've got freaking animals in there, who knows what they're doing in there, right? But like, really, I mean, these two documents are so crucial to protecting the seller. And going back to Chris's deal, he did so many things that protected him in this deal. And one of the big ones was that huge down payment. We're talking about $100,000, Lyndon. Let's talk about $500,000.
Yeah.
You throw $400,000 into a freaking property and you default? Are you a fool? I mean,
Right.
No one's going to do that. No one's going to do that unless somebody, God forbid, has a twister situation, gets cancer, dies, an earthquake comes to Montana. I don't know. But like, no one is going to do that. The person that can pay $400,000 to get into a property like this is very unlikely to default. So there are all these tiny little things that people can do, from structuring the deal to the team that you bring on. I mean, Chris's lawyer is local to where the home exists. If something happens and he has to start to deed that property back, that lawyer was involved from the beginning of the deal. These are expenses that a lot of buyers don't take on, but they should, because they are there. They're built in from the beginning to solve problems and mitigate issues that can come up at the end, right? Like, everyone pretends that there's just nothing you can do. That is not the case. There are so many preemptive things you can do. And I feel like, because we work in this every single day, sometimes we hear from investor buyers and we're going, Bueller, like, you in there, buddy? Because there are so many things you can do right now to protect yourself for a little bit of extra scratch. It's just like spend the extra $1,000. Don't be cheap, and like, do right by the seller, do right by yourself. Do right by yourself. And the seller of these guys, they don't know what they don't know. Agents don't. I mean, I was going over a deed of trust and a promissory note, and I had an agent call me and go, I have no idea how to review this. I don't ever look at these documents. And I was like, okay, let's take a bye-bye, but Folks don't know what they don't know. So instead of trying to pick apart the elephant and eat it bite by bite, they get overwhelmed. They say, this is illegal. They say, this is a horrible decision. They say, you're going to regret this for the rest of your life. When in fact, Chris just netted a significant amount, sold his house at a price point it would have never sold at in this market, and built in layer after layer after layer of accountability and protection. And when you aren't as savvy as Chris, you can work with people as savvy as Chris. Let the pay experts. Don't be one of these weird generational people right now that doesn't want to pay anyone to do anything. You want to DIY everything, guys. It's not a great choice. Pay experts to do expert things, and that's evolution, right? Like, it's just so weird to me these days. People are trying to constantly cut corners when there's so many fantastic resources out there. We are living in such a fantastic age of information. It's so weird to me. But yeah, promissory note, deed of trust, you need both. And when you do that for your seller, you are holding yourself accountable to performing on that obligation. And that's what you should do, right? It's like, it's so black and white for us. We're like, this is logical, right? Like, we're not crazy.
Right.
But then, like, let's even get to the basics, Chris. So, like, you closed, your buyer came in, you got to the signing table, all documents signed, closed. So at that closing table, just from the basic standpoint, all utilities transfer, because this is a typical sale, right? So all utilities transfer to this new buyer, correct?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this will be talking about hiring the professionals. So if people don't know, transaction coordinators have services post-close to make sure the transaction goes well, transferring insurance, getting utilities done, getting everything set in. I paid for Daniela to do this for my buyer because I wanted everything to be right. And Daniela was like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yes, Daniela, 100%. I'm sure. I want you to do this because I want a professional. One, you come across as professional, and two, I want a professional to help out my buyer do everything right because I don't want to get a utility bill in 6 months. I don't want to deal with any of these things down the road." And so, yeah, we went to the closing table. We got everything done. And then this, I think, a key thing for both the seller and the buyer, there's a handful of things that have to happen after the fact, for these transactions to go well. And having someone who's done it before and guide you through it just makes it much easier. I know Daniela has been working with my buyer I think they got the utilities sorted out, a handful of other things they were doing, just
HOA,
to final, like HOA, all that kind of stuff, just getting that wrapped up. And could I have done those things? Sure. Do I have the skill set to do them? Not really. And so you hire someone who's able to do that. But yeah, the closing table is great. We closed, passed it off, and one of the benefits, I still communicate with the buyer occasionally. She's asking me questions about, like, hey, what about this? Like, you're going to have a bit of a relationship with your buyer, and I think you should. You should know this person who's going to be there, and because you likely are going, there's the chance you'll have to communicate, be it in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, and I think that's okay. And I think the root of that for a lot of people considering selling their house, doing like a creative transaction versus conventional, everything has pros and cons.
Yes.
In this scenario for me, the pros for my creative one is I made way more money. I had a higher purchase price. I'm able to get cash flow each month from this property. The cons are technically the mortgage still in my name. This could happen. This bad thing could happen. These bad things could happen, right? Those are all cons. Versus if I sold it conventionally, I would have walked away with, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 grand, like maybe. And I would have to drop the price out of all these kind of things. And and the mortgage wouldn't be in my name anymore, but I had all of I have very few pros to a much longer list of cons. And everyone has to realize that their own kind of mental math of like, why would you do this? Not what are the pros? What are the cons? And then go down. And if you feel comfortable with the pros better than the cons, then make your decision and move on and don't worry about it otherwise.
Agreed.
Yeah. I think that, it's when you do work with, it's what it comes down to is who you work with. And, you touched on it briefly there, utilities do in fact transfer like a typical sale, as well as a brand spanking new insurance policy replaces your insurance policy in that transaction too on the home. And so now, the buyer of your home got a brand new insurance policy and put it on the home, put it in the escrow so that it's paid every single month, so that you don't have an insurance policy on the home anymore, because it is a traditional sale in the sense of an insurance standpoint. And so, that's just educating the sellers and the agents on how the structure works, not only pre-close, so like during negotiations, during title, during escrow and all those things, but also post-close, and knowing the mechanics of how to structure everything. And because, for someone who's never done this before, especially like your agent and your buyer, like it can seem like a mountain of different moving parts and things and intricacies and nuances that if you don't know what you're doing, you can really set yourself up for failure. And that's why working with the right people is so hypercritical, not only before, but after things close. And then you keeping the relationship with your buyer is so cool too. Like I have relationships with many of my sellers still to this day. I have a seller that I bought his home up in Kalispell, Montana, that he just texted me the other day and sent me a photo of him and his family back up in Kalispell at Glacier National Park. And so we just, you have those relationships in terms of things, and you don't have to, by no means. I have some homes that I'll never speak to those sellers again. And that's okay. It's just dependent upon, the relationship that you build and the credibility and rapport and all those aspects. So I guess, Chris, was there this was a long drawn out process. And I know that with this buyer, it took, I think, a 45-day escrow period, which is normal, but we typically close these in around 30 days. So it was a little bit longer. I guess maybe touch on, wasn't there a crazy fact of this transaction that took place to get to the end, the finish line?
It's never clean in real estate. It doesn't matter if it's traditional or creative. There's always something funky that comes up.
Yeah, so it wasn't like a 40-day escrow period. I think it was about a 4-month escrow period.
Yep.
So the spoiler alert, sometimes these transactions and buyers can be bad. We had an initial buyer that we went under contract with, I think in March. And we did the contract, and we had a contingency in the contract that we would essentially agree upon all of the creative finance terms by this date. Like many good deals, his attorney threw a fit. I'm happy he had an attorney, but his attorney did not like it. His attorney was offering terms that were not initially agreed upon, and we ended up canceling the contract. Essentially, they didn't hit their contingency on the date we needed, and we canceled the contract for the buyer. The downside of that is the buyer had already moved into the house because he needed a place to live, which I thought was fine. And we weren't expecting any issues to arise, and so we were willing to do that. Now I will say I drafted the lease. We had good lease terms that saved me. So if anyone ever moves in pre-close or whatever, have a lease, because this all fell apart. That buyer ended up suing me, which has been a fun experience going through that. Anyway, so that all happened. Our buyer ended up was a backup buyer, so we re-engaged with them. They were very interested, and then we had a long close because the original buyer was unwilling to vacate the property until the end of his lease. So that added, he had about a 3-month lease because we had a longer close period planned with him as well. So we had to sort that out. So that was fun. So yeah, like things are, I learned a lot in this transaction in real estate. This doesn't happen every deal, but we had bad buyers. We had a buyer threatening a lawsuit, which was really interesting to go through. And then for the second buyer, one of my co-buyers passed away unexpectedly in escrow, which was also unexpected. My buyer and a family member were going to buy it together. They were all the documentation and stuff, and one of those family owners passed away unexpectedly, which caused a whole kind of another just updating of documents, confirming if that buyer still wanted to move forward. They did, all these kind of things. So, yeah, we learned a lot. And again, for people watching, like, this is not standard, this is not normal, but sometimes real estate isn't. And yeah, I learned a lot in this transaction. And I don't know if I got milestones or check boxes or merit badges, but having someone pass away during escrow is not something I was expecting on my bingo board in 2024.
Yeah. I deal with stuff like this all the time, and so do a lot of other transaction coordinators and agents and people that just work in real estate every single day, right? Life happens. Life continues to happen around us, completely separate from these life-altering transactions, and we just have to sort of roll with it. right?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Totally. You
But
have to roll. Yeah.
I mean, and again, like I look back at it, I talk about pros and cons. Like even with all of the crazy stuff that happened, this was probably the best outcome that I could have had, my family and I could have had with this transaction. So yes, it was seemed stressful, but it was totally worth it. We got it done at the end of the day, and it might not work for everybody, but it definitely worked for us. And I really have to recommend to people that if you are looking to achieve, I guess, a non-conventional goal, a purchase price you didn't think would be possible, terms that you didn't think would be possible, the ability to cash flow on a house after you have left it. Creative Finance was able to do that for me. And if I had just gone the kind of same old conventional route, finding a buyer, going to a bank, paying off my loan, getting paid, none of this would be possible. And I guarantee that this single transaction is setting up a much different trajectory for me and my family than if we had gone a conventional route. And there's no doubt about that.
That's great. That's so great. And that's a great way to wrap this up and discuss this for hopefully if you're a seller watching this and interested, or if you're an agent wanting to learn, reach out to Chris Geddes. His name is down below, and you can ask him more questions. You can always reach out to Daniela or I for very, questions in regards to these types of transactions. Daniela is a guru when it comes to an engineer and all the things of the nuances of these. And so reach out if you have any questions. And thank you, Chris, for kind of deep diving into selling your home the way you did and sharing those stories and all the aspects of things for our audience here. And yeah, so such a cool story. Such a cool story.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really glad I got to come on, both of you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Thanks.